This is Show Up as a Leader, a show from People Forward Network, helping you maximize your positive impact on the world by becoming your best, fully authentic self. Hi, everyone. We talk a lot on this program of showing up as a leader and that leadership is not about a title or role. And for any of you listening who do have formal people leadership responsibilities, let's be honest, it's a different skill set. It's a different way of showing up. And so I very much appreciated this conversation I had with the amazing Ophelia Byers. She is a nurse executive at a New Jersey healthcare system, and she is founder and principal of SitchRoom, which provides leadership coaching and culture consulting services. And we had such a great conversation about really tangible practicalities around leadership and things that we need to be thinking about. She talks about how important it is that we have a shared mental model for leadership within organizations, that we are doing the work to work on ourselves first, and really allows us to have more team-centered approaches rather than me-centered approaches. We also talk about aligning our intention and impact and so much more. There are so many great tangible things, questions you can ask yourself, questions you can ask your leader, questions you can ask your team members, and just things to think about that can help you elevate your leadership game. Well, Miss Ophelia, I am so excited to have this conversation with you. I think we could probably chat for hours. There's a lot of synergy with our work, but I want to jump right in because there's been a lot of talk lately around recognizing the importance of rethinking how we develop people, and is the way we're developing people effective? And I know that when you and I met and we're talking in preparation for this conversation, we were talking about the 70-20-10 rule that I know there's been some controversy around whether that's the development, but for those that aren't familiar, 70% of our development is really supposed to be those on-the-job moments, those training experiences, those engageable moments. 20% is more formal, like going to a development class, whatever that might be, and then 10% is mentoring. And you have such an effective, I'm going to say pragmatic and really human approach to leadership that really nurtures that 70%. And I think that's missed so often. When we work with leaders, they think about, well, our people are upset because they don't have development opportunities and we don't have the money to send them to classes. And I think they miss the boat. So can you say more about why you're so passionate about that 70% or really creating those on-the-job moments and what that looks like for you?
Yes, the 70% is absolutely vital and crucial in leadership development. And it really is having a deep knowledge of your team members, understanding what makes them tick, if you will, what their goals are, how things are going when things are going well, understanding why it's going well. What does success look like to them? What does progress look like to them? And then when things are not going so well, we have a really good sense of where to go and how to support them because we asked, we didn't wait until a crisis or a problem arose to inquire. And that's the kind of responsive versus reactive, if you will. Getting to know our people, starting there, is really, really important. And then ensuring that we almost custom design their experiences around their individual goals, as well as the organizational goals and the team goals. That's always something that's kept in sight. Likewise, we have to keep our team members' individual goals in sight. And that allows us to then be mindful of opportunities when they arise. So here's something that Rosie's really interested in. I know what her goals are, and an opportunity came up, and that would be great for Rosie. But the only way that I would know that is by first getting to know you. So I think that's a really big part of it, is that relationship-based leadership, and then making sure that our team members have opportunities to use what they've learned. That's another big piece. So when we talk about that 20% going to courses and perhaps getting coaching or things like that, really important. But now where are the opportunities to utilize that and to really exercise those muscles? That's also something that's missing because we're not thinking about how to include our team members in experiences that will grow them.
I love it. Well, and it's so interesting how there is such a disconnect. You send someone to a training program or a class or whatever, and then it's like it just sits there because there isn't that thoughtfulness maybe ahead of time of, hey, I know you're going to this, and let's talk about not just how you come back and share your learnings, but how we can then help you apply those learnings or what opportunities. And so I do think that gets missed a lot. I talked to so many people, they went to a conference, they went to this, and it's like, oh, it was nice to have. And now they're actually using it outside of their job, but because there's no place at their job. And I'm like, wait, but your employer paid for this. And then now you have no opportunity to apply it at work. Like something doesn't make sense here, right? It should be a no-brainer, but it's not. Like you have to know your people. I cannot tell you, Ophelia, how many leaders at our various clients that I have conversations with that I'm like, how often are you actually meeting with your people? Well, I don't have time for one-on-ones. Like either I have too many direct reports or I have too many things to do. And I'm like, but your number one role as a formal people leader is to the people within your span of care. So if your calendar is so booked with other things that you don't have time for your team, that's hugely problematic and you're not going to be that effective. And so I think that in and of itself, I know so many leaders, they don't have a clue. Like they're just meeting and checking the box on projects, but they don't know them as a person. They don't know what they struggle with. They're not having that dialogue. And it's not rocket science. It's take time for a conversation, meet with them 30 minutes, God, at least once a month. And just, are you checking as a human? Or are you just jumping to tasks and then thanks, yep, move on?
I love that you brought that up because I often think about structural barriers to effective leadership. So within that concentric circle of leadership, right, there are leaders above leaders, if you will. And it's certainly something that leaders at higher levels of the organization have to think about from a strategic standpoint. Is someone's span of control unwieldy where they can't be effective leaders? It's also a setup for failure. We are saying to leaders, this is what you have to do, but it truly is not manageable or not sustainable because structurally the organization is not set up for leadership success. So span of control assessments are really, really important. What number of direct reports can someone reasonably manage? And what is the expectation around leadership? Is it just to check those boxes, make sure the schedule is done, make sure payroll is done? Is it just those day-to-day operation things, or is it truly focused on people development? If it is, then it requires structures be put in place to support that kind of leadership. So some of it is also the organization's responsibility to not only set the expectation, but set the framework.
I love that you said that because you're right. They go hand in hand. We always talk about like, if I'm coaching or working with a leader, you can't take a changed person and put them in an unchanged environment and expect that anything is going to be different. And so I love that because I think that there's this interconnectedness. It's yes, I have to be effective as a leader, but I know a lot of the work that we're doing with our clients is going back to the foundation and saying, well, what does it mean to be a leader of this organization? Like, what are your leadership non-negotiables? What are your guiding principles of leadership? Have we really truly defined what that looks like so that you can then develop and coach and support and create the systems for that to happen? So if those conversations haven't happened, I think that you do have people who are floundering. So I agree. There has to be wraparound systems that support not just the leadership, but the culture that you want to create. So let me ask you this. So let's assume that the systems are there, but why do you think so many formal people leaders fail to adequately develop their team?
Gosh, I think that is probably very, very multifactorial. Certainly one of them is really how we learn leadership and what the definition of that is. One of the things that I like to do when I am leading teams, mentoring, coaching, let's start with a definition. Before we get into the thing, let's make sure that we're all aligned on what that thing is and what it means. And a lot of times we don't have that conversation because it seems elementary. We think that it should be understood. You have X amount of years of experience. Surely you understand what leadership is. But that's not necessarily true. And what you can have people working on the same exact project that have different views of what that project is, what the goal means, what the process measure should be. There's way too much that's left up for interpretation a lot of times. So you said something really important. It's making sure that there is a shared mental model of what leadership is, and those expectations are set, the resources are there, the monitoring is there, the development opportunities are there. I'm not sure that a lot of leaders have those kinds of structural supports and have shared mental model about what leadership is. So you have a team, and really it's just a group of people. It's not necessarily a team, a group of people who are like-minded in that they share this broad overarching philosophy, if you will. But what that looks like in practice, how you get there, how you enact that mission, or how you achieve that vision is not a cohesive approach. I think the failure is a lot of times just not really knowing what is expected. Also not being cultivated. Then you get back to that 70-20-10 piece. If you have a number of people who've learned leadership a certain way and there's no expectation that is guiding them, everyone's kind of doing their own thing. It's like separate empires, if you will. I think that's one of the biggest failures there, is that there's a lot of gaps for their team members to fall through.
I see that all the time. You said this a couple times in that, and I think it's important coming back to is whether the organization has those agreed upon expectations or not. If you're sitting in a formal leadership role, or you're thinking you want to move into a formal leadership role, because it's not for everybody. We all can show up as a leader and maximize our positive impact, but actually formally leading people is a totally different skill set. And so when you think about if you're sitting in a leadership role at an organization, what stood out for me is, okay, if there's not that agreed mental model and we don't have clarity of what does it mean to be a leader in this organization, this is your opportunity to lead up and ask those questions and say, can we have this discussion and start to really strengthen our leadership culture and our leadership bench strength, if you will, within the organization. So it's a lead up opportunity. But the other thing that struck me is even in the absence of that, it's kind of this idea of, can we align on what done looks like at the start of a project? I don't know about you, but I see so often, I literally have these conversations on a daily basis of, well, did you align on what done looks like? Whether it's with a peer, whether it's with a leader and a team member, whatever it might be. It's like, are we on the same page of what the priority level is, by when, what a good job looks like? And we tend to miss pieces of that, or how this fits in with a bigger context. And then there's lack of alignment and people are either swirling or off doing other things. So I think just that having a conversation that doesn't take hopefully that long to just make sure we're on the same page about what we're trying to achieve, what a good job looks like, what done looks like, can be hugely helpful.
And that monitoring piece, having that conversation initially, but also those check-ins to make sure that we're still on the same page. Because as we know, when we go through any improvement process, things that we didn't expect or anticipate may pop up and can take someone off that original path. And so the checking in process is really important. I love quality management principles from the ISO 9001 that uses quality management principles, and it's very, very people-centered. And it really starts off with making sure that the people who are closest to the work are continually engaged in the process, that you are, one, taking their input, their feedback, and making sure that that's guiding how you're addressing the issue, checking in with them to make sure, is the way that we're proceeding the way that you imagined we would? If not, what's different? What do you think about how we're doing? It's that kind of how's my driving that organizations need to do. And in your question, you said, well, let's say if an organization has that all together, why are people still failing? And I think that's a really, really powerful question. If people are still failing, we have to now go back to redefine what does it mean to have it all together? Because chances are we don't. Sometimes we will think that having it all together means we have X amount of resources, we have continuing education reimbursement, we have all of these things, but resources are not practice. They are extremely important. We love resources, but you can't set it and forget it. You have to be checking in and really understanding what was learned is being applied. So I would certainly challenge any organization that feels like we have the mission, the vision, the core values, the resources, all of those things, but our people are still struggling, to really go back and introspect.
Resources are not practice. And I think that that's super true. I know that you have quite a wonderful track record of leadership and leader of leaders. And I would love to hear from you. What are some of the biggest lessons that you have learned so far as a leader that have been helpful for you?
I love the leadership style of authentic leadership. This idea of being in a state of self-awareness. What are my strengths? That's something that I always ask leaders to be cognizant of and be unafraid of stating. Here's what I do really, really well. And here's where my opportunities for improvement are. Here's where my energy level is today. That kind of self-assessment, it's not to the point of second guessing ourselves and being hypercritical of ourselves, but it is an awareness that's really, really important. Before we go out to lead people and set expectations for them, we have to have set some for ourselves. So for me, that authentic leadership style is really, really important. Being responsible for the energy that we bring into the space, as Dr. Jill Bolt Taylor advised in her book, Stroke of Insight. That's one of the things that I think is really, really key for all leaders. I think that when leaders are challenged in their leadership practice, if you speak to the people who report to them or even to their peers, you will often find that there isn't the self-awareness, that they are resonating differently than they think they are. That's something that if we don't get a handle on to make sure that our intent aligns as closely as possible with our impact, because of human nature, there's often a gap. I don't think that there's a perfect, gap closure there because there's a number of variables that can affect how someone sees your intention. But we do have a responsibility to make sure that gap is as narrow as possible. That is really what being responsible for our energy allows us to do.
There's so much wisdom in all of that. And I think so often we, like collectively as human beings, but also as organizations, tend to focus on what Bob Anderson and Bill Adams call the outer game of leadership. So it's the leading others, it's the practices, it's the skills. But really what you're talking about is what I'm so passionate about is we have to start with the inner game, and that's self. If we're not having a good day, if we're not owning it, if we're not able to say, hey, like, I know this is my strong suit, or I know like I had some crazy travel lately. And I said to my team, like, I was getting to the end of it. And I'm like, okay, I am so fried right now that I know I'm not thinking clearly. So please bear with me. If this thought isn't making sense, like I've just owned it. Like I'm fried. I'm not able to give you my best thinking, but I'm going to do my best. Or here we go. Or sorry, I missed that or whatever. And I think we've been doing work lately with leadership teams. And it's amazing how eye-opening it is. People are like, wait, I need to work on myself. No, it's just all about other people. Like I don't need to take my armor off. I don't need to show myself. I don't need to be vulnerable. That's not leadership. And it's like, no, it is. We have to lead ourselves. And it's so amazing to me and powerful to see people have this awakening of, I need to own my stuff before I go out and talk to my team. I need to own my stuff before I hop on a call. And you think it should be common sense, but it's not. And there is such a lacking of, we think we're showing up, we have these good intentions. And when our humanity gets the best of us, we don't realize that we're having an unintended impact. We don't realize that maybe we're showing up kind of like a butthead and we didn't need to, right? We need mechanisms and relationships and psychological safety for people to be able to tell us when our intentions are not coming across the way we want. I love that you have such practical and tangible, like you move off of philosophical, like, no, here's where the rubber meets the road. So share, what are some of the things that you do to equip and elevate the leaders you serve?
It starts with, again, getting to know them, showing interest in their trajectories for their careers, for their teams. What is your vision? So there is this organizational vision, organizational mission. Absolutely. But what's your individual vision? What's your vision for your team? What is your dream for your team? One of my favorite quotes by author Toni Morrison is, when we enter positions of trust and power, remember to dream a little before we think. Asking people what they want for themselves, what they want for their teams, what they want for the organization. What are they seeing out in the community that people are saying about the organization, and how would they like to change that or sustain that or take it to the next level? So it certainly starts there. And then it is checking in. I value one-to-ones. It's that team member's time. It's not my time to preach and teach and convey information. It is to find out from them what's going on with you. How is your team doing? How are you doing? What do you need from me? And how am I doing? To your point, creating this climate of belonging, which is psychological safety, where someone can say, here's something that you did that didn't sit so well with me, or tell me why you did that. And so making sure that they have room to do that. I use one-to-ones for that. Use a really structured process where there's actually a format that I presented to my teams. And it's something to make sure that we guide our conversations and hit those highlights, but it's customizable. It's a template. Does this make sense for you and what you want to share in your one-to-ones? And if not, redo it in a way that makes sense for you, but let's make sure that we're hitting all of these points when we are meeting so that we don't get overtaken by any one topic and forget about other things that are important to you and to your success on a daily basis. It is making sure that I'm accessible. And it's interesting. It's probably semantical to some people, but for me, it's not. Being accessible doesn't necessarily always mean available because there are calendars and we can get very busy. It is knowing that your team members knowing that I can get in touch with you. If it's a text, if it's an email, I know that you're going to respond. I know that when you respond, you're going to add value or you're going to help me to get from A to Z. It's that reassurance that our team members need. That doesn't mean that they always can pop into the office and do a drop in. That may not be realistic. The idea of the open door policy sometimes, I think, weighs people down because they're thinking that it's very literal. It's really about your teams having the assurance that they can connect with you, that not just meet with you, but also connect so that even if it takes a few hours for you to respond, they know that when you do, it's going to be valuable. And it's going to be something that holds them over. And it's one of the things that I do with my team members whenever there is an issue, for example, that they want some advisement on. We address the issue, but it's also, what did we learn from this? What transferable knowledge or skills can we use and apply to another situation? Because I don't want you to just walk out saying, okay, that fire is put out. We want that. But we also want to think about fire prevention. Or how can you respond to that fire more quickly without waiting to meet with me again? It's these very practical little things that happen every day, but that it's taking these connections to the next level and not wasting this really precious time together. That's something that's really important to me, is maximizing the time that we have together and making sure that it's adding value.
It's the focus of building people's capacity rather than their dependency on you, right? Are we calling others to greatness, especially in healthcare, but in many other industries? It's been very reactive and it's boom, 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 boom. And people are fried. And when they're fried, they don't want to think. But I love that you're like creating the learning, like, okay, here. And then what do we learn from this? I know that we always do a Friday. We do short huddles 3 times a week. Every day doesn't work for our team. But at the end of the week, part of it is a reflection of the week. Like what went well, but what did we learn from it? But we call F up Fridays. Like what's the biggest misstep or squiggle or detour from the week? And then what's the valuable learning it brought us? And so much of our process improvement, like, you know what? I think we need a checklist for this. You know what? I think I need to manage my calendar differently. You know what? I need to block this differently, has come from those discussions, because it's not just putting out the fire. It's turning it into a brief, what's the learning? I love, how can we apply transferable skills, or how can we apply this learning to help us next time? And I think that piece is so simple, so powerful, but gets missed all the time. The other thing I want to circle back to, because I think this is a question I get a lot from leaders. I love setting the expectations around availability. And it doesn't mean like on the spot, but how do you balance that with boundaries? Because I know a lot of leaders struggle with this idea of, I want to be available or accessible to my team, but I also need boundaries. Like so many middle managers, especially, are frying out and feeling like it's just unsustainable. What's the guidance you have for helping your leaders navigate that space?
Part of it is having some real intentional discussion around expectations. Once again, it just kind of comes back to that, especially with team members who have expectations around visibility, have expectations around availability. Available to them might mean if they pop in your office, you should put down that phone or, step away from the Zoom. Preemptive discussions, when you know that there are hot topics with team members. Team members want to know, how are you going to support me? What happens if I need you? You can have preemptive discussions about that. That's a very reasonable, fair question. Let's talk about what you need. What does support look like to you? And then also, here's what I can offer. The other piece is when we have an approach of setting people up for success for the next time, that dependency becomes less and less. So part of setting boundaries is setting people up for success. If you create this dependency, then it's hard to have boundaries. Part of what leaders have to assess is, why does that being accessible or available or having that open door policy, what do I get from it? What does it feed in me? Because sometimes we can have our cape in the wind a little bit as leaders, like, I'm here for you. I have the answer. But that's not people development.
That's just feeding an ego. Like, we don't need heroes. We need growth partners.
The more that we endow our teams and edify our teams with information, coaching to help them come to their own realizations and awarenesses, the more that we do that, the more that they trust themselves. That's really how you can establish more boundaries. I believe in blocking and count. Those are very practical, concrete things that we can do to establish boundaries. But one of the ways that we can do it more effectively is we can help our team members to recognize and trust their own power. You got this. And guess what? If you don't and you make a mistake, I think about a leader that I had when I was a director of nursing, my chief nursing officer, amazing leader. She would go on vacation, leave me to cover, and she'd say, Ophelia is in charge. She's covering me. Listen to what she says. If she makes a wrong decision, I'll handle it when I get back. It was like, you're trusting me and you understand that I could very well have an F up Friday. I might screw up. And you're like, we can fix that. But me sitting there in your ear all along the way or standing in the way of that only stunts your growth. So encouraging our teams to trust themselves. Sometimes I have team members text, are you available? And I'll say, I'm in a meeting right now, or I have a meeting coming up really soon. Is this urgent? It's not. You got this. I think that that's an important thing with boundary setting is, yes, it's those concrete things. But if you're not setting your teams up for success, then blocking calendars or being really rigid with those things can be off-putting because they're out there floundering. They don't know what to do next. They don't have any guidance, any compass, and they can't get in touch with you.
What's coming to mind for me is like, it's really having that alignment conversation. Like if anyone tries to block stuff with me, like my calendar looks absolutely crazy because I live and die by my calendar. Like if I block prep time, I block follow-up because otherwise meetings will get put on my calendar. And it's like, I can't be a calm, clear leader if I am not taking control of my calendar. My team knows, like, guess what? I am not an email all day long. I check it in the morning, clear stuff that I need to tend to. I'm depending on the day, I may or may not check it midday. And I check it at the end of the day. Like my email does not dictate it. And I don't keep the chat open. So they know, like, if something is urgent, like they know that I'm going to get to email once or twice a day, depending on when they email me. And I'm not really going to be on chat if I'm in the middle of a meeting and the chat's going because it's too distracting. And so it's like, if it's urgent, text me. But it also gets that filter of, is this really urgent? Like, I know she's in meetings. I had a team member once that was like, would overuse the text and it was very reactive and then would get mad when I wouldn't respond. I'm like, I was in the middle of coaching a leader. Would you want me to not pay attention to you? And the text wasn't urgent. So sometimes it also helps you like help people decipher that quadrant of urgent and important. Like, okay, it's not that you don't matter, but like it comes at reactivity. I call them to greatness to decipher that. Okay, do I really need that? Can I sift through this myself? Is this something I can talk about at our next team huddle? Is this something I can talk about at our next one-on-one? Because otherwise, so many leaders don't unplug. They're checking their email at night. They're not unplugging on vacation. And that just only perpetuates the cycle of stress and burnout that is just so rampant right now.
It's fear-based. It's getting down to what is driving me to constantly check my email, constantly. What's under that? And if we dig deeper, I think we find fear. I'm worried that if I don't have my finger on the pulse, something will go wrong. That's just not true. And if it is true, then we need to reevaluate our leadership practice. And so our teams can handle it. If we have prepared them properly, if we have helped them to see their power, helped them to relinquish the fear themselves, they'll be fine. We can have that vacation day. We can take PTO. We can be on a meeting for an hour without multitasking. So a lot of that introspection is just keeps coming back to authentic leadership and the person in the mirror. What is going on with me that is driving my approach to almost perhaps even some micromanaging, or this approach to needing to be the hero or the savior? What is that about? And is that truly team-centered, or is that me-centered? Asking those questions and taking that time to be real with ourselves is a really great way to sharpen our practice.
So appreciate that you brought up the fear aspect, because I do think that's the ugly stuff no one wants to look at, but that's what causes us to armor up. So like if I have a fear of not being in control, of course I'm going to micromanage. Or if I have a fear of not being perfect, of course I'm going to have unreasonably high expectations. Or if I have a fear of being irrelevant or not being the go-to person, of course I'm going to jump in and hero. Like I think we don't want to go there because it's ugly, but I think in the absence of coaching, because we go right there in coaching, like you can't not. But I think from a leadership practice, being able to have that safe space, whether it's in your one-on-ones or whatnot, to say, let's just put it on the table. What's the yuck? What are the monsters or the unhelpful stories in your brain telling you about this, or what makes this feel scary for you? And just have a real conversation, because I don't think we do that enough, but the fear-based self-protective behaviors are what gets in the way more often than not.
And it's asking, what are you afraid of? What is that thing out there that you are afraid of doing or that could happen? What is the worst that could happen? What are you imagining? It's such a great question. And I'm glad that you talked about the safe space piece, because we have to, as leaders, be able to have these direct conversations with ourselves and also with our team members. And one of the things that often gets me with leadership is that we've made direct pejorative. We use it as like almost a slur. It's just very direct. How can we be authentic without being direct? Direct is not pejorative. Direct is not absent of empathy. It is not absent of respect. In fact, when it's done well, it is the epitome of respect and empathy. One of the things that I often say is, for me, constructive feedback is the ultimate form of teamwork. I don't need to hear all day what I'm doing well. Of course, we need acknowledgement and validation, but I am searching for opportunities to be better. And sometimes I can be myopic when we're looking at ourselves. And so I like to have outside perspectives on how I can be better, especially when they are in earnest and well-intended. I want to hear how I can be better. We have to have those direct conversations. And when we have relationships, and here's how it's all really interconnected, right? When we start out building relationships that are rooted in respect, in trust, and integrity, and I model what I expect, and all of those things, when it's good, then when we need to have that crucial conversation, as they say, or courageous conversation, there's already a foundation of trust and mutual respect and support there, where the person knows where you're coming from. It doesn't necessarily make it easier to say or to hear, but there's excitement. For me, I love feedback conversations because I am always excited about what's on the other side of it. It's so paramount to say, as you said, are you sure that if your team members who are afraid, or are you afraid? And say, it's okay if you're afraid. But the only way that we're going to get to resolution is if you acknowledge that. Being able to do that does require a relationship. You can't come in cold, because then it doesn't feel well-intended. It doesn't feel person-centered. But again, when you're starting with a strong foundation that's rooted in trust and rooted in mutual support, and your team members know that you walk that talk, they are receptive.
It's operating from that space of radical candor, caring personally, but willing to challenge directly. And I know whenever we discuss that when we're talking about feedback, it's like, well, if you haven't invested in the caring personally, meaning you don't have that relationship, even the best formatted feedback is going to be received perhaps as obnoxious aggression or something else because that relationship isn't there. And even if you deliver it in a little bit of a more clumsy way, if that relationship is there, it will still be probably received better. So it's like, yeah, this is not feedback coming from judgment or I'm trying to fix you or something's wrong. It's in the spirit of mutuality and growth. We talk about in the Dare to Lead work, clear is kind, like unclear is unkind. Like when you are clear and it's in the context of a safe space and relationship, it can help people not only elevate to a higher version of themselves or a better version of themselves, but it also can help us process those fears. And so I think that's a really good segue talking about the fears and what are the monsters or the unhelpful voices. One of the things that I've learned over the course of my career and doing this work is that it is human for us to tell ourselves stories that are really fear-based, but they're self-limiting. So we have these stories that we tell ourselves that keep us safe, but keep us small. And so in the spirit of authentic leadership, Ophelia, I would love it if you would be willing to share what is a self-limiting story that you still tell yourself sometimes. And when it shows up, how do you move beyond it so that you can still show up as a leader and maximize your positive impact around you?
When there is something new, when I'm doing something that I haven't done before, even if I'm invited to do it, can I do it? It's not quite imposter syndrome. It is really, do I know how to do this? Not even so like I'm afraid that I'm putting on a front and that people will see me in that way. It's just, do I actually know how to do this? And I always have to talk myself down from that and say, Ophelia, pull on your experiences. You have a lot of them of being a nurse and 16 plus years of being a leader and being a human being and being a mom and a wife and a budding entrepreneur. Like you have a range of experiences. And on top of that, you also know how to find stuff out. You are resourceful. You can ask questions. Here's another thing you can do. You can also say no if you don't think that it's something that you can do or want to do. You have options. And I think that that is something that I have to remind myself is that I have options. I have resources. And I can surmount whatever the perceived challenge is. And that if I decide to go through with it, there's growth on the other side of it. So I can choose how I see it. It's almost like that courageous conversation. So this is like a courageous conversation with myself. There's growth on the other side of this, whether you choose to do it or not, because there's growth in being able to say, that's not my wheelhouse. And guess what? I'm happy to recommend someone who I think would be fantastic at that. But that even requires some muscle, right? And some humility. For me, it is that self-limiting belief of do I know how? And remembering that I have an array of options available to me.
Love how you process that. All right. Are you ready for quick questions?
Sure.
Fill in the blank. Living authentically is
being in my integrity at all times. Brene Brown.
When the world is presenting an opening, but you don't feel like showing up as a leader, what do you do?
Thanks, but no thanks. It's okay to say no. And as they say, no is a complete sentence.
Love it. What is something people would be surprised to know about you?
Seeing a rainbow can bring me to full on tears. It is one of the most glorious things ever.
All right. What is your favorite go-to movie?
Love Jones.
Okay. And what's your go-to song?
The Impossible Dream from Man of La Mancha.
All right. Ophelia, what is something you can't live without?
My faith in my family.
What is something in your ordinary daily life that makes your heart happy?
My faith in my family.
I love it. Consistency. What are you grateful for right now?
My faith in my family.
I love it. We're consistent. That's awesome. Well, I want to ask you one closing question, Ophelia. If you could challenge leaders everywhere to practice this one behavior that will create more human workplaces and equip everyone to show up as a leader, what would that be?
to care deeply. And that sounds really simplistic. We use the word care a lot, and I don't think it goes deep enough. To care deeply about the human condition, to care deeply about people's lived experiences, the individuals in front of us, to care deeply about how their lived experiences affect the work that we need them to do for the organization, to care deeply enough about the work that we do to work on ourselves. Deep caring is essential. There's knowledge, there's skills, and all of those things are more easily attainable. But deep caring requires work to try to understand a little bit more about how we can be of service to them and to humankind.
I love that challenge to leaders. Well, Ophelia, I could talk to you for hours, but thank you so much for the work you do. Thank you for modeling what it is to be a courageous leader. Thank you for the insights and tips that you've given. And just thank you for being you.
Thank you for being you and for this platform and for your excellence and expertise. And to the listeners out there, any nurses in the audience, I just want to say happy Nurses Week and thank you for all you do.
I'm Rosie Ward, and this is Show Up as a Leader. To learn more, head over to peopleforwardnetwork.com and, of course, hit that follow button.